What's up, it's your boy Nova the Based Skunk, and I'm finally doing a video. So Eminem, born Marshall Mathers in 1972, is a Detroit rapper known mostly for... Just kidding, I'm sure you know who Eminem is. Let's jump right in. Just so you know, I'm not counting compilation albums, D12 albums, deluxe versions, or any other non-long play album, just the original LPs. Albums are arranged by tier and then ordered from worst to best. I'm also not going to spend too long on any one album since Eminem is a music industry veteran and a full discussion of every album would take hours. I'm also liable to piss you off at some point with my opinions, but that's okay. I already expected that. So with that, let's get started. We have absolutely nothing in F tier. Eminem at his worst is still better than a lot of mainstream rappers at their absolute best. Okay, maybe not Fack, but as a rule he manages to put out some quality tracks even when he was making his least enjoyable music. So first up is Revival. Revival isn't nearly as bad as everyone says it is, honestly. If it were not an Eminem album, it would be a solid middle-of-the-road album by another artist, but for Eminem it's beyond boring. My exposure to it has been a couple full listens from beginning to end and random singles plays, and while the songs are listenable and to some extent enjoyable, they're also forgettable. I forget the titles of just about all the songs, and if you ask me which is which, I probably couldn't tell you. Not only is this overly bloated album filled with rehashings of the same content he's done before, but it's done in a less engaging way with boring beats that have been poorly mixed. It also has by far his worst use of features in any album, with songs like Walk on Water and River, which are melodramatic and deeply unenjoyable. There are high points on the album, like Castle and, to a lesser extent, Untouchable, but I just don't care enough about those songs to find myself revisiting the album. Alright, so I'm sure I'll be turning heads for not giving this an F, let alone it not being in last place. In D tier, we have Encore. While Encore has songs like Mockingbird, Like Toy Soldiers, and maybe even Spend Some Time, that's not why I rank it higher than Revival. There's actually a lot more to Encore than what people give it credit for, and I think it's best summarized by this bit in Big Weenie.
I fucked up. Psych, I'm kidding again, you idiot. No, I didn't. That's just what you wanted to hear from me, is that I fucked up, ain't it? But I can bust one take without looking at no paper. It doesn't take a bunch of takes for me to stand here in this booth all day for me to say the truth, okay? You're drooling. You have tooth decay.
Encore, despite feeling aimless, seems to have a very clear point. It's an album of deliberate self-destruction that Eminem recognized he could have prevented at any point. He never lost his ability to rap or write. He intentionally chose not to use those talents. Mind you, that's still not enough to forgive how abrasive and unenjoyable the album is as a whole, but I still see some value in it, certainly more than Revival. Moving to C tier, we have Infinite. I really don't have a lot to say about Infinite. It showcases early Eminem's lyrical talent with beats heavily influenced by local Detroit scene, with songs like Backstabber reminiscent of early Danny Brown, and even Jealousy Woes 2 sounding straight out of an early Insane Clown Posse album. That's really enjoyable from an artistic standpoint, but not an album I find myself going back to. I do recommend giving it a try though, since I'm sure most Eminem fans have never really given it a chance. Next up is Kamikaze, which, after Revival, was a breath of fresh air from him. Unfortunately, the overall I hate critics and new rappers theme, along with the album as a whole feeling like a disjointed collection of songs as opposed to a cohesive project, holds the album back. That said, Fall is easily in my top 10 Eminem singles list, and as a huge fan of Chipmunk Soul, Good Guy is one of my absolute favorite beats Eminem has ever used. He even adopts some modern flows and trap-inspired beats, albeit in a tongue-in-cheek way, but even when he's doing it ironically, he does it well. This is about the point in the list where I find myself wanting to go back and listen to the whole project with maybe a soft skip on Nice Guy. So our next album is Eminem's most recent, Music to be Murdered By. While unlike Kamikaze, it's not an album I find myself wanting to return to all that often, it showcases the most versatility Eminem has had in years, be it stylistically, lyrically, and even with his features. Tracks like Ya Ya and Unaccommodating are absolute bangers that keep me engaged throughout, and Darkness, though obviously an attempt to recapture the magic of songs like Stan and Bad Guy, is still an incredibly haunting listen, with its only weakness perhaps being somewhat dependent upon the music video for the full effect. The only real weaknesses I found in Music to be Murdered By are the same problems that hold back the majority of his projects after the Eminem show. Songs like Marsh and In Too Deep not only feel samey with the rest of the album, but they also suffer from weird mixing problems that lead me to skip them when they pop up. But yeah, the album feels like a general return to form for Eminem, and it's refreshing to hear. Alright, so get your eye roll ready, we're moving on to B tier, and our first album is Relapse. As mentioned before, Relapse's primary issue is that it's overbloated, with 3 songs often doing the work of one. He could have chosen one of Hello, We Made You, and Medicine Ball, as well as one of Stay Wide Awake, Same Song and Dance, and Bagpipes from Baghdad, shortened the album by nearly 20 minutes, and he'd have a near masterpiece. There's way too many incredible songs on this album for it to get the sort of reputation it has, with Deja Vu being one of the best storytelling songs he's created to date, along with Insane, Beautiful, and Underground all being 10 out of 10, lyrically complex but still deeply enjoyable songs. Overall, it's a decent album with too much chaff to meaningfully get to the wheat. Next up we have Recovery. There's really not all that much I can say about the album. It's a solid 7 out of 10 that suffers from the same problems that Relapse had. There's a number of boring, samey-sounding songs like Talking to Myself, Cold Wind Blows, Spacebound, Going Through Changes, Cinderella Man, So Bad. Maybe I rated this too highly. Well anyway, if those songs are relatively boring, they're still pretty high-quality songs that I don't feel a compulsion to skip. And on top of that, songs like No Love with Lil Wayne, Love the Way You Lie with Rihanna, and my personal favorite, Here We Go, the final hidden track, are absolutely incredible. Overall, this could get a 9+ out of 10, it just takes way too long for the level of variety you get. Moving on to A tier, we have the Marshall Mathers LP 2. So this is probably the most unique album in the list in that it's the only album I find is most enjoyable when listened to in one sitting. Though on an individual basis, many songs may not be his best work, something about the aesthetic of the album gives a lot to songs like Stronger Than I Was and Love Game. I've had the discussion before, and I've described the album as being of an uncanny valley aesthetic, and it's not like something you can really describe if you haven't listened to the whole album yourself. Also, unlike other albums on the list, the weaknesses do not come from the album being too long or samey, despite the fact it is nearly an hour and a half long, longer than Relapse and Recovery. The only weaknesses are a couple individually weak songs, particularly Berserk and So Far, but even those benefit from being in the context of the album. Overall, I think this album can go toe-to-toe with any of his big 3 early albums and deserves more credit than it gets. Also in A tier, just barely missing out on being a top-tier album in my eyes, is the Eminem Show. What makes this album so unique is how much of Eminem's own production went into it, being the only credited producer for Drips, Haley's Song, Till I Collapse, and a couple others. I really don't have all that much to say about the album that hasn't been said before. It is, after all, critically acclaimed and for many a fan favorite, but unfortunately I think it's held back by the inclusion of some generally uninteresting songs like Drips and Square Dance. And I found Say What You Say and Soldier to be worse versions of pre-existing Eminem songs. Not that they're bad, I'd just rather go back and listen to Criminal. Finally, we're on to S tier, and there's very little I can say on these last 2 albums that hasn't been said before. I went with the Marshall Mathers LP first by my own preference. Of course it features Stan, a top 3 Eminem song and one of the most influential rap songs of all time, and it has some of my personal favorites like Kill You, Who Knew, and Bitch Please 2. Outside of Kim, which, context aside, I find to be a deeply unpleasant song with the emotion it conveys not worth repeated listens, at no point did I find the album getting stale or repetitive over the 70+ minute runtime. And of course, the final album on the list, the Slim Shady LP. This comes down to personal preference, and these 2 albums are near interchangeable as far as their ranking, but as a huge fan of Eminem's storytelling abilities, this album has to be one of his best examples. Brain Damage, Guilty Conscience, As the World Turns, My Fault, and especially 97 Bonnie and Clyde showcase Eminem's effortless ability to tell a story while maintaining intricate and interesting rhyme schemes and flows throughout. While I'm not a huge fan of My Name Is or Still Don't Give a, songs like If I Had and Role Model easily make up for it. Alright, hopefully I didn't talk your ear off too much today, guys. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you enjoyed it, make sure you like and leave a comment so I know to do more of these types of videos, and be sure to leave me a suggestion for other artists and ideas. Also make sure you subscribe and hit the bell so you can see all the other awesome content made by the Furry Valley YouTube team. We do video game Let's Plays, we've got speed artists, we've even got a BattleBots team. It's so cool. Thanks for watching. I'm Nova the Based Skunk, and I'll see you next time.